Welcome, everybody, to, I think it's our fourth session today. We're doing 6 live streams all across California for the California Canvas Collaborative. And I have spent probably 15 minutes with these two guys, and I am absolutely huge fans of both Ryan Mulvaney and Kevin Goodley. You guys are so much fun, and we haven't even started the session. So I'm really excited to see how you're providing meaningful feedback in Canvas there at your district. I think that it's something that we've talked. I know I've talked a lot about with the podcast with my partner Marcus Painter on doing the Canvas casters. We talk a lot about feedback and Speedgrader. So if you're a Speedgrader fan, Speedgrade user, or you're just learning the tool, there's tons of ways to provide meaningful feedback. And what does that even mean? So stick around because this session is going to rock your socks, I think. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you there at Riverside County. Let's do a brief introduction. And then Ryan, the show is yours.
Hi, all. Welcome to the conference here. And thank you, Eddie. Appreciate it. My name is Kevin Goodley. I work for Riverside County Office of Education. And I'm very fortunate to be able to introduce Ryan Mulvaney from Lake Elsinore Unified School District. Ryan's part, one of the school districts, he's part of our Riverside County consortium of schools where we have 6 school districts all using Canvas with respect to not only, as Ryan will talk about, providing critical feedback, but also looking at how we share information and resources and professional development amongst the consortium. So with Ryan, his part today, as he presents, will be how Lake Elsinore has been a tremendous contributor to the efforts for the Riverside County efforts to combine these school districts on Canvas to be able to make all information accessible among the districts. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. So my name is Ryan Mulvaney. I'm the Director of Instructional Technology and Alternative Programs in Lake Elsinore Unified School District. Let's go ahead and go full screen here. And so we'll start off a little bit about why we originally chose Canvas. And it really started with working with our student information system. We were interested in the grades transferring, and that was one of the biggest complaints when we're using some of our learning management systems is we had a whole bunch of different pieces, but we wanted it in one location that our teachers could access and our students could access. And it was scalable, the old Atari reference of easy to learn, difficult to master. In this case, I think it was very easy to learn, but it wasn't slowing down our advanced teachers from doing some amazing things, including embedding and creating some LTIs and things like that. So we were off to a great start. We actually started in the fall of 2020. We had about maybe 25 teachers that were using Canvas regularly. And then something happened in March of 2020 last year, of course. And so when COVID hit, we were shut down actually the Friday before our spring break. At that point, we had about 12 teachers in our district of about 1,000 teachers with any distance learning experience. We decided in our district that we were going to create opportunities for students to increase their grades. We had some sort of created curriculum. But then basically from March to August 2020, we held a whole bunch of training in order to prepare us for the 2021 school year, all based on trying to make it a meaningful year, not just kind of getting through it. And so starting from a basis of some of Hattie's findings, we looked at ways that we could transfer the good quality teaching that we saw in our classrooms for our students, even if they weren't in front of us. And so the opportunity that was presented was basically the teachers weren't ready to teach in a distance learning format in March. And that's not a judgment on them. As I said before, there's only 12 that had ever applied for that. I'm sure that we were dealing with something similar at a lot of our districts, but they were very receptive to discussions, training, on-demand support. And we did have those months of transition that we could look at. And really, basically, I guess from our standpoint, is self-deprecating when we go in and not come in as sort of like we have all the answers, but let's try to figure this out together. That went a long way in getting our teachers to feel comfortable in what they were actually using for the tool. So we'll go from there. Oh, sorry. All right. So when we started looking at some of Hattie's work, teacher credibility actually seemed to be a little bit tenuous at first, just because it's ranked so high with visible learning as far as the impact on student learning. But we wanted our teachers to feel comfortable. So reducing their affective filter and helping them understand it, really that transference of how they would use it. And so for that, we looked at formative assessments and feedback, which are also ranked very highly by Hattie in his work for impact on student learning. And then from there, we sort of our focus became how do we provide the meaningful feedback that our students need in order to be successful on in their plan or in the learning piece. So when you look at core transactions, if you're like a platform developer or an app developer, then you're familiar with that work. But basically, if you have something like Uber, oops, it's trying to, having a little bit of trouble with the slider. Yeah. So if you have Uber, you have your core transaction between the client and the person running it basically is they share a ride. In Airbnb, you share their space or you're renting out their, maybe their cabin or something like that. YouTube, you're transferring that content from whoever's providing it to whoever's receiving it, usually the viewer. And then we started with what is that core transaction in education? And we landed on meaningful feedback, which crossed over a lot of different ways with Hattie's work as well. So our method of onboarding this information is just basically realizing and being honest with it that there's no book for this sort of thing, right? When a global transit or a global pandemic hits, the first training that I actually ran, we had 2 teachers that were literally in tears as they were struggling with their concept of how they could show their competence to their students and get them to learn. So some of the supports that we put in place were a Canvas course that we created and updated frequently. In our district, we actually have micro-credentials that are compensated. So our teachers were able to complete a little micro-credential, of course, in Canvas that they use the badging system for. Once they created or completed that, then we also had a reference that we could go back to and kind of tap into them as training as well. And then we use Sched so we can reach out to some of the great teachers, just great teachers with no qualification on using technology to be able to transfer that to the classroom as well. So we looked at a whole bunch of options. The big thing here is making sure that feedback was a thread throughout all of them. As you can see, there's literally 3 sessions that we used that were just about basic getting them to understand the Canvas system, but everything else had that thread of using that feedback throughout it. And so we looked at it from a way to just share this and work together with no roles. We were all just educators trying to figure this out. We recorded our sessions. We send out things called Just One Things that talked about one tip of the day, literally just one thing. I mean, that's the name of it, but it would be something like how to sort Speedgrader differently or how to show students or use the teacher to-do list to show what assignments are coming up. And then at the end of every single session, we'd have what's called extra time, where we just wait on there, hear teachers' frustrations, kind of repurpose their time towards sharing that feedback and having that connection with their students, because that was the biggest feedback and frustration from our teachers, is that they wouldn't be able to do their job in a distance setting. And so that's where we'd see the high level of emotion from our teachers. We'd see the frustration and anxiety. And so that's where we started to pivot and look at the tools that Canvas provides for our teachers in order to provide that meaningful feedback to our students. And so the tools that we really highlighted, and we'll highlight over the next couple slides, are built into Canvas itself. We have some other tools that we use and leverage like Studio and things like that. But the basic just core product has some amazing things that our teachers started to see. The ability for them to share their expertise with their students was what they were giving them. To go back a little bit, one of the things that we would say over and over again is that our students don't need us to provide content, right? They have YouTube, they have the internet, they have photo math, whatever else kids are using to try to figure out our typical problems or things that we'd prevent them. They need us to understand that connection of where they are. So the more we learn about our students using some of the tools we'll look at today, the more we are able to literally do our job, even though they weren't in front of us. And so Some of the features that our teachers leveraged for feedback were just basically in the gradebook. So the gradebook itself, they would leave little comments. We found a great article called Giving Quality Instructor Feedback in Canvas from Miami of Ohio University that we use that as our sort of core foundation, but giving them feedback on each assignment. Even just discussions about some of the features in literal like 20-minute discussions on the importance of providing a due date for the assignments, because that shows up on the students' to-do list, which helps keep them organized, which is something they need in distance learning. But then really having a discussion about those availability dates and allowing students to turn in work again or resubmissions. So I'll show you some examples of what that looks like from the teacher that live from an example. But those were interesting discussions because it was this sort of, well, what happens if a student does their first attempt in learning and then they need to resubmit it, or how do we keep on track of them and make sure that they're going through the process. The biggest one, I think, that we got a lot of really positive feedback that we'll dive into as well was Speedgrader. And so Speedgrader, we would say it's not just a clever name. It really does save you a whole bunch of time. We did have to kind of keep in mind that saturation of tools, though, for our teachers. So we weren't just overloading, because Canvas has a lot of really amazing features. So we take little bits and pieces of them and actually share for all the trainers in our district, share those resources amongst themselves. So we knew that we were hitting the same thing. So when someone was mentioning the to-do list, we'd also make sure that they understood that when you click that as a teacher, that takes you directly to Speedgrader, which allows you to provide that content. So in this example, we'd focus on providing meaningful feedback using the media tool, or using a rubric, or using just comments, and then allowing that resubmission of work as well, which is a little bit of a difference between the typical setup that we would see in a classroom. When a kid turns in the essay, they want to be done with it just as much as the teacher might want to be done with it when they're done grading. And so that was the importance piece of it, is not just submitting it and being done with it, but also getting that feedback and showing the teachers how they could transfer that. So one of our favorite examples of this is we had a second grade teacher, which you'll see in a second, that the student turned in their first attempt in learning. This is the second day of school. You got a sixth grader that's never been in an online setting before, teacher that's never taught in an online setting before. And they have about 2 or 3 different submissions where the student starts off, isn't really hitting the threshold of what the teacher is looking at for proficiency. And then they're able to give them video feedback that explains how they can make their writing better. But when you see the grade changing, if not that it's all about grades, but definitely about proficiency, you'd see where a student would start at a 1 on a 4-point scale, start at a 1, get feedback from the teacher, resubmit and get a 2, get feedback from the teacher, resubmit, hit a 3, get feedback from the teacher, resubmit, hit a 4. And that, to me, is a successful lesson. The teacher did their job in providing their expertise. The student didn't get frustrated because they were getting something that was of value to them to resubmit that work. And ultimately, if it was about grades, then they got to where the teacher wants them to be and where the student wants to be as well, because they're a better writer out of it. So that was a good feature for them to use. You can't talk about, I don't think you can talk about Speedgrader without talking about the amazing annotations field within DocViewer. And that's where our teachers absolutely thrived, where they'd provide annotations, show the students exactly what they're talking about. And you'll see that on the example that I've kind of shared from one of our teachers as well. So this was the second day of school. There's a whole bunch of things going on as far as from an instructional technology standpoint that are exciting. You've got the student using single sign-in and all these nerdy technical terms, but you've got a rich task that the teachers provided for their second graders. The students using Office 365 integration to instantly share that work with the student or with the teacher. As they submit, the teachers using the feedback that they can give with the annotations to highlight where the student can do better. If we were using the drop down here, you'd see that this went from a 1 initially all the way to a 4 based on the teacher feedback, and the teacher giving some amazing feedback, including some of it that was video that they had on that particular assignment in order to get the student where they need to be. A little bit more on Speedgrader. And this is the piece that I guess I missed when we first started using Speedgrader and I was over at an online school across the street, is that when you're using the to-do list as a teacher, I think the grooviest sort of tip I could take is that ability to sort those assignments, because when you're going through and using a drop down to sort through all of your students, our teachers absolutely love the fact, if you see in the bottom right there, you can actually view by submission status. One of the most difficult things to keep track of, and that we had problems with historically, is what happens if you provide that flexibility to your students, but then you're trying to go back in time to kind of figure out, okay, what do I need to do as a teacher to provide that feedback? And so this feature of Speedgrader just by itself is probably responsible for more willingness of our teachers to be able to take accept late work, things like that, but also have the students resubmit, because they'd kind of go back up to their queue as they got a new submission that they might need to review. And that was huge for us, because we can't just say, oh, it's great and do this, trust us, it's going to be amazing. You've never done it before, but trust us, it's going to be great. We needed something that would streamline the process for our teachers, so they were able to do what they needed to do, but also provide the feedback that we were asking them to as well. We happen to be an iPad district, but this is on Android as well. This was sort of an unintended benefit. Our teachers got really familiar with using the iPad app just because they thought this was the bee's knees, because you've got your submission status on the bottom left there, where it shows your graded assignments, the ones that need grading and the ones that haven't submitted. So you can filter that down to, how students are particularly doing on the assignment, and then also go in and actually review those submissions. So this was one of those, got a little flack from my teachers for not introducing it earlier, because when they kind of stumbled on that about September, October, they were hyped up, because this is super useful. It's probably the most downloaded app on some of our iPads that are checked out to teachers, just because it's very easy for them to organize their work and see what the students are doing, see who they need to maybe get on a little bit about turning in their work. In this case, Joe Rogers needs to turn in their introduction to the solar system work, but it really streamlined the teacher's time, where typically they're being cognizant of the fact that they're learning how to deliver instruction, they're learning how to deliver curriculum, and they're really trying to do the best to motivate their students, all in a unique environment that they weren't necessarily set out to do up until March 2020. So that was important for us as well, to just kind of let them. Another piece, just from the feedback perspective, is understanding that they could give the question feedback. Just because we talked a little bit about feedback, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that this is one of those hidden gems, or sort of lessons, or one of the legacies that I think we'll see from the pandemic, is the willingness of teachers to work together to create common question banks in order to create common assessments that they can use to drive their PLC discussions in our classes as well. So this is we've always sort of had a question bank, program somewhere or whatever. We've used some different ones. But this actually made it easier for our teachers to just assign as an assignment. The kids would get quote unquote credit for it, but they could also add some in-depth discussions to drive their own instructional practices based on how they would do that. So yes, they could provide that feedback depending on how the students answered certain questions. But I think more importantly, seeing them see the benefit to be able to interact with each other, have some discussions about what makes a quality DOK level question, and then come to some consensus about how they want to assess their kids so they can drive that instruction. So that was amazing for us. On that point of using the quizzes too, we didn't limit our training to anybody, because we were educating paraeducators, our special ed education teachers and case carriers, even our psychs, people that were doing professional development, and of course our teachers. When we started incorporating all of these folks, you get different perspectives, which helped us create a more inclusive environment for all of our students. So just talking about quizzes, for example, One of the things that we talk at length about for all of our sessions is how to make this accessible for all of our students. So obviously within Canvas, you have some amazing things like Immersive Reader that provide access to your English language learners, or your students that might be struggling with reading. Making them aware of those resources that are just built within the system itself was huge. And part of that was the moderation that we'd have in place, and talk about the ability for them to have those second chances. Because ultimately what we were looking for and everybody sort of rallied around is how we can demonstrate their proficiency given the unique circumstances that we find ourselves in. Another kind of interesting, why didn't you tell us about this earlier? And like I said before, we were really trying to balance it on oversaturation of all the amazing things Canvas can do with providing things that we thought that were very helpful. But the messaging students who haven't submitted work or got a grade below a certain threshold was very important for our teachers as well. So even the fact of saying, hey, you haven't turned this in yet, make sure that you get this work in, was great, that they didn't have to go and kind of hunt and peck and find that as they would in other programs. And then one of their favorite ones was being able to use some logic pieces, I guess, in order to find students that might be in a certain situation. So in this example, students who scored less than a 60% on a particular assignment would be able to resubmit that, so they could let them know that they have that ability to bump their grade up. But when you're having a focus on mastery rather than compliance and completing work, you need these sort of features in order to make that make your students aware of that too. So students necessarily don't self-advocate the best in a lot of cases because there's a different power structure or something like that. But when you perceive yourself or you show yourself as someone who's just trying to help them figure out the content together, then these tools are very useful in helping reinforce that message too. Announcements were used a lot as well to give classroom reminders, which was great, and send those out. And then really just looking at how they figured it out together. And so using some of the LTIs that were useful in our district anyway, is we leveraged Flipgrid. In this example, this is an ASL class that if you would have asked me in March 2020 how we're going to do ASL via distance learning, I would have literally shrugged my shoulders because I wouldn't have had any idea. This particular teacher used a combination of Canvas Studio to give her students the prompts for how they'd be working that day. And then instead of the teacher being 100% where the content was coming from, she leveraged Flipgrid, which is just a little bit of a Flipgrid piece. You'd have your students review each other's submissions as well. So it was very interesting and a little bit nerve-wracking for me because I don't communicate with ASL. So when I'd go in those courses, it's completely silent. There's literally no talking at all. They're all signing and doing and going through American Sign Language, and even commenting on each other's videos with American Sign Language, which was interesting for me anyway, because I don't speak it at all or don't know what they're saying, but the teacher absolutely loved it. This is one of the teachers that at the beginning was saying, I'm trying to figure this out and I'm really just not seeing what it looks like. But through virtue of collaborating with each other, with the other teachers, but then also seeing the ways or distilling really down what it is that they're trying to get their students to do. The teacher is able to obviously provide feedback in the form of a bunch of different ways that they could set that up as well too, through Flipgrid, through Studio, through comments, things like that. And then looking at how they were figuring things out together as well. So leveraging student discussions. And so the teachers did a great job of not shying away from some really in-depth conversations. And this one, they were finding what the most justifiable of imperialism was. And you see some really interesting discussions as students are debating, there's nothing wrong with national pride or a race to build empires and things like that. So it really got to the heart of students having these amazing discussions that they would typically have in a classroom, but able to do that in a distance learning environment, which kudos to that teacher for understanding that they can leverage the same tools to have those amazing points of discussion as well. Another ASL using some of the rubrics to have the students self-evaluate. And so in this example, the teacher would literally just upload the rubric and say, I want you guys to score yourself. She'd obviously go in and kind of see how they were doing and help them out when they needed it, all by transferring that multimedia in that case for ASL to see how the students were doing. I would say one of the sort of aces in the holes is after we got that initial training, we shared how to share feedback and give that environment. We turned it over to our teachers. In our district, we use a tool called Sched, which is you might have seen for certain conferences and things like that. But by far our most popular sessions are when we turned it back on our teachers and asked some of our teachers that were a little bit further along, maybe more comfortable with the tools, to run sessions that we titled, Here's How I Use Canvas. So no judgment, not this is how you should use Canvas, but just different perspectives from someone at the district office or something like that. So literally the top 5 most popular sessions that we held, those are the session counts with 189 people, were the first one was just first week routines. And so being able to tap into some people that had a little bit of success or felt a little bit more comfortable just created that discourse and really got our district to feel like they were all in this together and sort of bouncing ideas off of each other, which we were able to do in our district. We were able to do it at our schools, but then also to be able to part of the Riverside County consortium that we have in our county was an amazing experience as well too. And then overall, what we had or what we felt was the most important thing was our guiding principles. So our guiding principle anyway. Let me see where it's not presenting this slide real quick. Give me a second. It's kind of, yeah. So the most important thing that, and we stressed this over and over again, probably in every session that we did, that the most important thing educators were learning isn't about the new technology tools or integration or pedagogical frameworks or new adoptions. It is and always has been the students in their care. And so that was important for us to show that transition of regardless of whatever we're using, we can do trainings and kind of have discussions about how certain tools work and what you click and what you don't click. But really it comes down to how do you find out about your students in order to help support them. From that's kind of us in a nutshell. I do want to share or do want to thank Michael Rowe and Kevin Goodley though from RCOE. It was amazing to have a background and be able to knock some ideas off of folks within our own district in similar roles. Because one of the interesting things that we found really quickly is when you have anything to do with technology in your title in a time like we're in right now, you sort of feel like you're in an island in some cases. So that was huge. And really do mean it from the bottom of my heart. That was amazing. There's times where I'm like, I gotta go see what Murrieta's doing or some of our neighborhood districts. That was an awesome experience. And I think we'll keep having those collaborations so we can kind of keep learning from each other. Like we say we should be doing with our students as well.
Kevin, do you have any parting thoughts before we get out of here on this session?
No, I'd want to thank Eddie for providing the time really just to have Ryan present. I think he did an exceptional job. And, for the Riverside County Office of Education, again, our perspective was ensuring that we can share and exchange information and resources amongst each other in this digital platform with Canvas. So as I said, Ryan has done a fantastic job as well as the other districts involved. And we just look forward to future collaboration and success with it and providing kids the tools that they need and the resources.
I love it. You guys are definitely, you're shining in a place again. It's a weird time. And as tech people, again, you feel like you're on an island. You're not quite sure if they love you or hate you, but boy, do they need you right now. So it was a great session. Thank you, Ryan, for sharing your passion and expertise there as well. Kevin, obviously had a great time collaborating today for this past, 30 minutes. We have another session, I think we're 5 of 6 coming up, which is consistency, Canvas, and templates for elementary and middle school. Super excited to present on that. So I can't wait to see what they've got scheduled. But also, let's keep the connection going. Make sure to register, or you can submit a session proposal right now for the Canvas California Canvas Collaborative, the C3 statewide conference. The bit.ly is in the comment section below. You can learn more about the C3, or if you want to get in touch with any of the presenters today, the email for Carissa Duran at Instructure is also in the comments below. So make sure you check those out and keep learning out there, Canvas fam. Super excited to bring you more sessions today. We'll see you at the top of the hour for another Canvas live stream with all of those in hashtag CA Canvas today.